It is week 10 in our year of stitches, and this time we're doing whipped stem stitch. So we are building on what we did last week, but this time we're gonna whip it. And I'll show you what that means, because this is something that feeds into quite a lot of different stitches. Now, for the whipped stem stitch, what I want to do is show you this in a way that I would use it within my work. So I'm going to draw a sort of swirling line, almost like a rope. So I've got myself a line here, and the reason I want to show this is because changes of direction like this are quite challenging to do when you're working in a stem stitch. They need a little bit of cheating, so I'm going to show you how to do it. Now, a bit like we did last time, when we put in our base stem, we're going to use 6 strands here. And now for a whipped stem stitch, that's actually important. Whereas before I did it purely because I was choosing to do it, for a whipped stem stitch, what you do is you lay down a base strand of stem stitch, and then you're going to wrap it with another thread. Now, what's important is that your base stem stitch has more strands of thread than what you wrap it with. Now, that can be one more strand, so it could be that we do our base strand in a 4 strand and then we whip it with 3. It doesn't have to be a massive difference, but I personally have found it most effective if I use 6 strands for my base stem and then 3 strands when I whip it. So let me get my 6 strands all together. And because we're working with 6 strands, we're going to need, of course, our large eye needle. So I'm going to grab mine. And I'm going to tie a knot. Now, this is going to start exactly the same way as our last week, where I'm going to start at the end of the line and I'm going to be doing a stem stitch the whole way along the line. So as you're doing this, you're now a pro at stem stitch, so you don't need much guiding here. I'm going to fast forward until I get to this bend, and I'm going to show you the little issue you're likely to run into there. So now I'm just at this curve. So you see, I'm going to go up to the top. But like I said before, in the last video, it's really important that you always bring your needle up on the same side as you stitch. And that's where you start getting confused when you start doing loop-de-loop. So remember, my loop of thread is always going to be on the outside. That's how you best remember it, because suddenly I'm now bringing it up below rather than above, but actually I haven't changed direction. So you just have to be really careful at this stage that you don't accidentally switch which side you're bringing your needle up on. So now I'm going up and I'm coming round, always taking my loop to the outer side. And when you are doing a tight corner, often it's easier and neater if you make your distance between your stitches a bit shorter around those tight areas. When you've got nice long stretches, they don't have to be really close. But when you're working in little narrow turns, then it's much neater if you have them closer. So you see now, you can start seeing that I'm bringing myself back to the position I was in before when I was stitching. So here we go. Now I'm back into my right place and I can start elongating the stitches again. So that's how you go round a corner in a stem stitch. You make sure you're always stitching on the same side, and then when it's a tight corner, you make sure you bring your stitches a bit closer together. So I will now just fast forward again until I get to the end of this line. Okay, so I'm at the end of my line, and all I'm going to do now is just seal off my thread on the back. And I'm going to get a contrasting colour, and this is where I want you to use fewer strands. So here, got my contrasting colour, and I'm going to just work with 3 strands now. So thread them up like normal, tie a knot. So this is where it gets interesting. We now are going to go through the process of whipping our stem stitch. So when you whip your stem stitch, you wrap another colour of thread around it. So what you can see here is that my diagonal stitches are all sloping downwards. What I want my whipping to do is to go in the opposite direction. So that means I have to have diagonal stitches going upwards. These come down, my other ones have to go up. So I bring my needle up underneath on the bottom side, you see here, of the thread. And then from this point onwards, it becomes a pure surface stitch. So I'm going to take my needle up and I pass it underneath the point where the 2 join. So you'll feel there's this natural point here. You see we're between the 2. There's this natural point where your needle feels like it wants to go. And as you start whipping, you see you start then creating this twisted effect. Now, if I had used the same number of strands for my whipping as I'd used for my base, the whip would actually end up eventually hiding the colour you've got underneath. And the beauty of a whipped stem stitch is being able to see both colours. So what you don't want to have happen is to use exactly the same number of strands and then lose all the colour that's underneath because of this. So I'm getting round to here. You see how quick it is a process creating this. So I'm just going to go under here. And then when I get to this point, I want to replicate the idea of this bit being over and this bit being under. So you have a little bit of a fiddle here because it's sort of cheating again, like I kind of said before. So I'm going to fiddle through, bring my needle just through the threads here underneath so that I'm going back along towards the same sort of point but on the other side, and now I'm going to continue. And so I was always pulling my needle in from top to bottom, so you see I've got the same diagonal direction. Now this is again like we did before, you just have to make sure you remember, so my needle is going from the inside of the loop to the outside of the loop. So here I'm going to go from the inside to the outside. And you just have to be careful remembering your direction. It's a fiddle and you will always forget it from time to time, and just don't worry if that does happen. It's not super noticeable. So you see, going inside to outside. And I'm coming down to here, and then I'm just going to carry on along. And then it's much simpler from this point onwards because I'm back in my classic way I was working before, and I'm not having to worry about which direction am I coming in on. So I'm always going top to bottom. My needle is never going under the fabric. It's an entirely surface stitch. And that gets us right to the end. So when you get to the end, you're just going to wrap over, take your needle under, and then close off. And what you'll notice on the back is that there's none of this light blue colour because of the fact we've only worked on one side of the fabric. And that is your whipped stem stitch. As you can see, it's really perfect for things like rope effects because you get this lovely wrapping. There we go. That is week 10, and that's your stem stitch.